Hey everyone. So I think I know most of you here, but for those on Zoom, I'm Dan Boscavelin. I'm an assistant professor of philosophy here at Pratt in the Department of Social Science and Cultural Studies, and I'm directing the Critical and Visual Studies Symposium in 2024. The Symposium is a course and lecture series designed to introduce students to the research of Pratt faculty and distinguished visitors, structured around presentations on general themes that change year by year. And this year's theme is Songs for the Dark. That's a title that's based on the Brecht poem Motto. The idea was sort of to confront the question of how, as thinkers, artists, and activists, we should relate to the darkness of our times and how we might in some way help to illuminate it. Since the course began, the times have gotten darker still somehow. As Leonard Cohen asked, you want it darker? You got it. And the questions correspondingly, I think, more urgent. So today we're very fortunate to have Professor McKenzie Wark here to think about them with us through the lens of her current work. McKenzie is Professor of Media and Culture at Eugene College, the New School. She's the author of numerous books, including Reverse Cowgirl, Love and Money, Sex and Death, and this lovely little book, Raving. I also just wanted to say, on a personal note, that McKenzie's work has been very influential in my own thinking in various ways. Always, it's wide-ranging, but always original, insightful, and provocative in the best ways. Today, she's going to be talking about dancing in darkest times. Please join me in welcoming McKenzie Wark. Can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Come closer to the screen if you're trying to get all of it in the frame at the same time.
We're good. I can zoom in or out as we need.
Okay. Yeah, so I was going to talk about this book, Raving, as a way of talking about practices around raving itself. And any writers in the room? Any visual artists? What are other people doing? Have I covered all the basics here? Architects. What else is Brad doing? Architects. Yeah. All right, we can get into a bit of that. Yeah. Anything else? I've missed? Photography. Definitely getting into that. All right. So I've got some idea of media practices to touch on. It does sort of engage with all of those. I have magpie interests where I just like to do lots of different things. Usually after a book, I try to figure out what went wrong, this one I was trying to figure out what went right. It sort of did really well, and it sort of, people put it on Instagram, and people now come up to me at the rave and want to talk about it, and it's like, girl, pick your moment, it seems like a Monday morning office hours thing you want to talk about here. It's like, oh, it's something like work there, and I actually didn't know what it was. Like, it was accidental, I can't take credit for it. So how do we, figure that out? And it's coming out in translations. That's Spanish, Italian, German, and Czech, and Brazil, Portuguese to come for the thing. So it sort of circulates in a way. What was I doing? Don't know. So let's figure that out. Maybe I was starting to call it critical auto theory for a minute. So it's just it's a gag on critical theory and auto theory together, right? And one is the good thing and the other is the bad thing. It's received wisdom that autofiction and auto theory are like the neoliberal genres. It's like, this is just the most brain dead thing I ever heard, but people say this. So I sort of wanted to put those things together and sort of think, all right, what does it mean to do a kind of writing that starts from the sensory particulars and records those, and then tries to build that out towards sort of a social technical totality that you happen to be a part of, and where you're trying to be engaged with percept, affect, and concept at the same time. This is like Deleuze's triad of sort of like the flows that one is produced out of and immersed in. And to think about practices a little bit. I wrote theory for a long time, but it's like, oh, what are practices? I'm not good at that. Like, who is and what are they? And how do we think about them? So this one was about the Brooklyn queer rave scene from 2017 to the present. I didn't stop doing the field work with this one. Like, usually I wrote a book on computer games and then I just quit. I'm like, I never need to play a game ever again. but I'd still do this, which is a mystery in itself. But it's very specific in place and time. And people often want to talk to me about like Berlin, and I'm like, I don't care about Berlin. This is like Brooklyn, you know? It's not even New York. This is like this tiny little piece of Brooklyn is my area. And then how is one both sort of in and not in that world? There's a thing in anthropology of whether you're writing from the internal or the external point of view about a world, and this, I think, is sort of liminally both. It's trying to sort of have that both ways a little bit, not just to be an ethnographer because it's a world that adopted me, that I needed in a way, but I have a somewhat liminal position in it. Because I am way older than most people you find around this world. This was my 60th birthday party, which was at Boston Nova Civic Club. It's a legal club, but it's, you know, kind of rave adjacent. And that's, my trans mom is in white, my photographer, Z Walsh, is behind me, and Silas, who works a lot of these parties. I'm decades older than most people here, so I have a certain distance and connection to it. And I don't want to be a tourist or to be doing something extractive in relationship to it. And that's why this can't be journalism or the kind of scholarship where you did your field work and then you go away. You know, it had to be something else. And all right, so what can I bring to this world? I have zero musical talent. I can actually barely dance. You know, I have no moves. I'm not a promoter. I co-curate the Writing on Raving series. So, what if we created a space that was adjacent to it where people could reflect on it and write about it? And we could like develop writing talent out of it. You find writers in this world as much as anything else. There's my co-curators of Writing on Raving, Jeff Mack and Zoe Beery, and that will be an anthology that's out next April. Which you know, if I have a superpower, it's not writing, it's editing. So I brought editing to bear. To get that to come together. When I get offered editing gigs that come with budgets, I can pay people in this world. So this is trans women of color writing about dancing for Factory International. And with Madison Moore, I co-edited the Black Rave issue of eFlux Journal, which also pays contributors. And we were aiming for an all-black lineup for that. The Brazilian isn't, but we came close. We needed to cover Brazil, and you know, I found someone with a good piece of writing on that. So those are some of those things. And there's other people besides me are sort of trying to figure out the sort of intellectual documentary space adjacent to Rave World. Madison Moore had a residency in the kitchen. Anybody go to this? It was a couple of years ago. That was amazing, and I learned a lot from that. And this is Kevin Aviance at the kitchen, 2022. So back to the book. One of the motivating interests was which aesthetic, and this one is like, you probably get this in Aesthetics 101, right? The Apollonian and the Dionysian, you know, sculpture versus music, the light of day versus the night, dream versus intoxication. The thing about this book, though, is Nietzsche says in passing, yeah, it's going to be about the Dionysian, but not the Dionysian of the barbarians. That the Greeks have managed to keep out of Attica. The Dionysian of the barbarians, it's too sexual, and it's too immersive. It's too much. So we're not doing that. I'm like, oh, I want to do that. I want the secret third thing. You know, so like what's beyond the Dionysian in a way, sort of became the hook in a sort of aesthetic discourse. So there's a lot of house music and other genres, but I'm sort of interested in techno centrally as a musical form. See, like techno is at its best when it's really generic but not a cliche, and that's unbelievably hard to do. So it's like, yep, 140 beats, 4 beats per bar, there's no melody, it's a little bit of like scratchy noise going on in it. Yep, genre, but it's not a cliche. You know? It's hard. Techno is black music, and I wanted to center that and to probe what it means to be an uninvited guest in somebody else's sonic culture, to the point where the guests have taken it over. but I don't think that's a reason to forget where it came from and what matters about it. So some threads to that is this middle book by Eugene, which really changed how I hear, which is called More Brilliant Than the Sun. It's been out of print for years. You can get PDFs of that really pretty easily. DeForest Brown Jr.'s Assembling a Black Counterculture is like sort of the definitive history of black techno, and it's a black nationalist account of black techno as black sonic response to deindustrialization as an era. It's one of those books you like sip rather than gulp, you know, like every chapter has a playlist that's 60 tracks long that you'll want to know about. It's comprehensive. I drew a bit out of Undercommons too, and I feel like it's more Fred's voice than Stefano's. There's a whole thing about the transness of black music that then talks about Little Richard and Big Mama Thornton as gender non-conforming artists that are the two sort of key founders of rock and roll in a way. Little Richard was always personally important to me because he probably reconverted to Christianity in my hometown when he was on tour in Australia. It's sort of like a famous story. So that was the first anchor, right? So the musical anchor is techno, but I'm not really writing about the music. I just need to acknowledge where it came from and what about it matters. What I want to write about is raving. Like the book's called Raving. You know, a lot of people are like, but there's not enough about DJs, and this book's not called DJing. You know, I've made a solemn vow never to DJ. Right? It's not what I do. I dance. I'm not claiming to be a good dancer. I will just do it for a long time and know how to handle myself. That's it. So in terms of ways of writing, I was interested in what I think of as auto text. I really have to fix the spelling on that slide. It's been bugging me. Anyway. And you know, I kind of like had an argument at a conference, probably in this very room, about like autofiction. Because everybody's like, oh, autofiction, it's narcissistic, neoliberal, blah, blah, blah. It's just the dumbest thing I ever heard, and I'm so over it. Autofiction is gay and it's French, and it starts with Jean Genet, and was named by Serge Dabrowski, who was a French writer. You know, it ain't Rachel Cusk, you know, it's just not that stuff. I don't know what that is. You know, how do you put the I in the sentence, but not have the sentence come from the I? How does the sentence tell you how the I got made in the middle of it, right? So it's sort of like the opposite. It's like the autotextual is centers the first person, but it's not from the first person, it's about it. It's about its construction. So Genet and Guillaume Dostin, my sort of French guiding lights for that. My American ones would include Audre Lorde-Sammy, which she called mythobiography. So, okay, name it. Name it whatever you want, Audrey. I'm not going to mess with that. But it was important for me because it's a book about the women who made her. So it's an inverse of an autobiography or a memoir in that sense. And Samuel Delaney, who wrote 2-3 lovely non-fiction accounts of like gay New York of his era. And yeah, just hats off to Red Jordan Roboto, who's much less well known, was writing black lesbian pulp fiction and selling photocopies of it in bars, and then came out as a trans man. And so there's sort of interesting play of first person in that work as well. So Raving is part of a series of books that are sort of exploring form. The first was Reverse Cowgirl, then Raving, and then Love, Money, Sex and Death was the more recent one. But we don't get into that. But it's after I transitioned, I couldn't write theory anymore. Like it just wouldn't come, and I actually couldn't write for 3 years. And Raving was the book that sort of broke the writer's block in a way. And it's like, oh, I'm sort of writing in a different way now. You know, hormones really just change your life, right? If you've ever experienced their fluctuations, you know, it's sort of like a lot happens. So, all right, the middle one, Raving. Let's go Raving, but also let's not claim we are the ones who are going to bring the conceptual apparatus to it, because it already is. Every world is already conceptual. It's already thinking about itself. It is already generating its own philosophy, its own language, its own culture. So my first job is who are the organic intellectuals of that scene who are already doing that, even though they're not philosophers or anthropologists or anything like that. And that would include Tim Froelich, who self-published his own book. Tim was such a hardcore raver, he didn't know what to do with himself during the lockdown, so he compiled all his blog posts and notes and stuff and did a book. And Jasmine Infinity is there at Bossa at my 60th birthday. I interviewed Jasmine. It's one of the people that I learned a lot from. So yeah, there are people already thinking about it and already know what to say about it. And there was already a politics internal to it. This was town hall at Nowadays about centering blackness and queerness and transness in nightlife. And this was sort of hilarious because one of the points that was made is it's straight white guys own all the clubs, almost without exception, and then the owner of Nowadays had to come and end the whole thing by congratulating himself with having staged it all, And it's like, Jeremy, you meant well, but this maybe wasn't the moment to center yourself, but so it goes. So where does this happen? I'm mostly interested in that little bit of Brooklyn. There's a party that now regularly happens in Brownsville. There's one I went to that was amazing in Chelsea. But I'm interested in that little, you see Maria Hernandez Park, that's where I live. So it's all happening in there and up towards Newtown Creek, which is the weird blue, sort of squiggly bit. You can tell it's Industrial Creek because it really does turn right angles like that when you're on it, right? It's been, and you can see some legal venues, elsewhere, Knockdown Centre, the eternally cursed House of Yes. House of get the fuck out of here. So in there is a bit of light industrial space that is available for enterprising promoters to throw illegal parties. And as my friend Janice Rose says, illegal parties are better than legal ones because they are illegal. Like it changes the sense of the use of the space. So you could call it Bushwick. There's ambiguity about, is that East Williamsburg or is that Bushwick? And the thing about New York is these things are arbitrary usually, and no one really knows where the border's supposed to be. But I like to think of it in terms of what the situation is called psychogeography, like where is there an ambience that gives you a sense of, when you step over there, that feels like Ridgewood, even though it's still technically Brooklyn, that feels like Ridgewood, the psychogeographic borders for ambience can be different to the, and it varies depending even on the day or the night. Sometimes it feels like you're there and sometimes not. Some of this research happened during the lockdown, and this was complicated. Should there even be even outdoor parties at that time? This one started as a Black Lives Matter protest and it turned into a rave at the end, and it got moved around by the police and ended up in this dead-end street in Red Hook. That really is the Statue of Liberty in the background, and it's the last photo from my old phone before I got the iPhone 13 or whatever it is, with amazing images you could get on it, and we'll come back to the photography part, but it's as good as you could get with, I think, whatever it was, an 8. And this is zoomed in a little bit too, There were also rooftop raves during that period. All right, so the thing about this was that, there's a community for whom COVID was not the first or the only threat to life. That we're already managing harm reduction on several axes at once, and that there are people for whom being isolated in a unit, a residential place that's a family unit, or even a bunch of roommates is not going to work. If a shared household is starting to fall apart, it's the trans woman who's going to get blamed for it 9 times out of 10. It's just how this happens, So the social space is just necessary for some people to survive the other risks in life. So I'm not really going to go too far in justifying that we were having parties through this time, but it was a little bit managing these other risks. And I lost 2 people who were close to me during the lockdown, and I think isolation was a huge part of that, yeah, that maybe they'd still be with us if we'd been able to keep them in community of some kind. So, you know, so much discourse about this, like endless threads on Telegram, but, you know, that was something where I landed on it personally. This one, though, was kind of terrifying, and I left shortly before the police arrived. This was a rave that happened in Newtown Creek rail yards, and the lineup was really eclectic, and it ended up being all city. People came from all over the city for this, with different expectations, different styles of partying, different relations to each other. And then a bunch of high school kids showed up, and my crew was 3 of us. We're just like, we got to get out of here, you know, like this could really go wrong. This like very drunk cis white woman just literally fell on top of us, you know, and might have also been on substances, you know, and my friend is trying to get her to drink water and she's like fighting it. And it's like, oh, we're 2 white trans women and 1 cis black woman, and this white woman thinks we are now the problem and other people are starting to look at us, but we're just trying to give her water in case she took MDMA because we don't want her to have liver failure. So fortunately we succeeded in that. She stumbled off, but it's like, we're out of here. This has got out of control. You know? So shit happens. It happened right on those railway tracks. You can almost sing in that last line. So some questions about how to interact with this world, or any, like these are sort of, I guess, method questions, yeah? How do we understand emergent culture? Like, what's the contemporary? Everyone talks about contemporary art, but like that just means this month's art form, right? It's like it can be contentless. The modern at least had a before and after. Like there's 2 points in a timeline the modern had to think with. The contemporary's got 1. And I think it's very hard to know when are you reading the present just through the past, or when are you claiming novelty that's not really there. And you know, the tempos of history or everyday life, the you know, change is analog, but language is digital, and it's sort of hard to find. But you know, maybe just go see, hear, feel what seems like an aesthetic moment that has the present in it, and where might that be, and where is it not? You know, it feels like you can step into even a dance floor that feels like it's late 2024, you could step into a dance floor that feels like 1998, you know? So like, where is that moment? And that's where DJs kind of matter, and it's one of the things I love about techno is it used to be music about the future, but I think it's now music about the present. How do you sonically signal what the present is? In a way, house music doesn't quite do, because it tends to have a connection to roots. And a way that you know, situations where people are dancing to the songs of their youth is never gonna kind of give you, yeah? So where's the experimental practice? Like, where are people trying to invent not just works of art, but a way of life? You know, like, where is that happening? And who is making that situation? And we can be a little mistaken about that. You know, it seems like the DJ makes the party, but really, like, who did the lights and who is the promoter? And as a promoter I've been getting to know, and who literally said to me, you know, it's so easy to get DJs. You try getting a cleaning crew. Yeah, like, who wants to show up to some shitty warehouse at 6 o'clock in the morning with like pounding music you probably hate and clean up after a bunch of drunk queers? Nobody wants that job, really. So to get a good cleaning crew who will rely, it's harder than DJs. So, oh, that's making this happen as much as everyone else is, yeah. Who makes the situation? And how do you become part of that? And then what's your role in it? Like, what's, you know, one rave mum, I'm always bringing people bottles of water and listening to their troubles, and I have to be diplomatic, I can't take sides in any of the little scene feuds, you know, I have to be above that. So there's a particular role. For me, it might be different for you. And then what's a literary form? Like, I already touched on why I thought what I'm thinking of auto text would be interesting. And then the other thing I'm interested in, and it's sort of like connects to this being an urban phenomenon, is like, what are the expressive social types? I don't want to tell the stories of individuals with the details of their recognizability attached to them, because one of the things about rave is you kind of leave your name at the, like outside when you step into it. So yeah, what are social types and how do we think through that, and who are the types you meet on the dance floor? They ended up being the most popular part of the book, and I've worked on this before. What is a hacker or what is a gamer? It struck me as ways of thinking about moments in the recent past. And there's a history to thinking through social type. It's, I think, the strength of, everyone ever read T.J. Clark? It says, used to not be allowed out of art school until you'd read this one, yeah. I really recommend The Painting of Modern Life, which was sort of like the classic application of sort of Marxist method to thinking about visual art. And Clark was really good on how 19th century Paris created, among other things, the social type of the working woman, who has some degree of independence, who will also have money and leisure, and that social type shows up in Impressionist painting, and the two are kind of connected. So Clark was a bit of a guide, and Clark's getting this from Walter Benjamin, and Walter Benjamin got it from George Simmel. So when you're in a village, you know everybody. When you're in the city, you don't. And how do you deal with strangers when most of who you meet are strangers? You think about them through what type they belong to. That can include stereotypes, obviously, but it doesn't have to. There's other ways of thinking about type. And I guarantee you, if you ride the subway, you will have done it today. Yeah? I'm not the only one, right? You get on the subway, you look left, you look right, and you're like, I think I know your type, I'm going this way. And your judgment of that can be wrong, right? And is probably based on a whole bunch of assumptions. But that's what being an urban person is about, yeah? And I'm like, oh, those 4 young men seem really drunk. Maybe I want to not be in that part of the train, is the decision that I'm going to make there. So hacker, gamer, and raver. The 4th type that I do, if I could figure out a method, is hustler. I just love the figure of, like, the hustle is so much a part of contemporary life, but I haven't found a method for that one yet. So I'm going to talk about ravers, but then raver breaks down into other subtypes. And I talked about, everyone loves a bit about, on the dance floor you meet the punisher, who thinks that for them to have a good time it has to be at your expense. Yeah, and often it's like straight man isn't always, but they're the most annoying punishers. Then you got your co-workers. The co-worker is going all out, so they will have an amazing story to tell their co-workers on Monday morning at the water cooler. And so they don't really know how to do it, and they're probably going to get way too hammered and be a little too enthusiastic. And that's not ravers. Like, ravers do this all the time and do it as an endurance phenomenon. And so on. So yeah, I was teasing out subtypes of raver in the book as well. So I've been interested in histories of avant-gardes, and maybe this is one, but maybe it's an extinct category. And I'm interested also in bohemias, and that's also seems like an antique word at the moment. But where is the space where people are attempting to invent, collaboratively invent ways of life that sort of start to liquidize social conventions and hierarchies to construct other aesthetic practices, but also ways of life. Usually in the city, this way in which Bohemia requires the city. And when do Bohemians launch avant-garde movements? I spent a bit of time studying the Situationists. That was sort of one version of that, and that was my 2 books on them. From whom I learned a kind of street ethnography. It's like, well, yeah, let's ask the people who live that way. They're interested in the avoidance of work. It's like, rather than the labour movement's obsession with labour, what's like avoiding work and who does that? Well, let's learn from people who do that. There are the situations that not work in in the early 60s. I love the wine stain on the table. It's kind of like. It's funny, you go to a cafe in Paris and they're exactly the same Ricard ashtray will still be there today. It's like, never change, Paris. And the other thing I learned from working with the Situationists is like, always ask the women what's going on, right? Because that's the real story. That's the tea. And whoever else is othered in it, yeah. Do not take the official spokesperson to know what's going on. Ask the person who does their laundry for them. So I got interested in how contemporary raving has a lot of people who do knowledge work in it. So like rave is a English, Northern English 1980s phenomena, was about the collapse of industrial labor. And it was a thing that people who formerly would have gone into industrial labor did. This is a very different, kind of people showing up. Like the people who meet at raves are doing, knowledge work in inverted commas, service work, sex work, or they're nightlife workers. If you show up after 4 when the legal clubs shut down, then all the people who work in that legal part show up at the illegal party as an afters. Yeah. So it's like, oh, what do we need that this gives? Like what release from the imposition on the self of being a knowledge worker or service worker does rave provide for people who, once the co-workers and punishers are gone, it's just us. Need out of this. Why is like pounding 140 beats per minute techno helpful in getting out of your own head, So it's less coming from the need to work the muscle is coming from trying to work the muscle in your head. But a lot of it's very precarious, both in terms of the people who show up to party and the people who do it. It's a very itinerant kind of work. A lot of it's cash work, so it's attractive. So you meet the kind of people who need cash work. You meet a lot of trans people who don't want to work under their legal names or can't. You meet undocumented people. I'm interested in what sort of techniques made it possible. When I showed up, I did this in the 90s, and then I came back after like a 20-year chill out, and I told people, like, this is better than it used to be, and everyone was like, what? There's so much like nostalgia for the good old days, but I think it's better. But partly the techniques are better. Like you get so much better sub bass out of CDJs than you can out of vinyl. Like it just goes much deeper. The CDJ enables DJs to have a lot more possible tracks to play with, and it makes it cheaper to be a DJ. You're not spending a fortune on vinyl to get into the trade. There are plug and play components for every single piece of putting it together. You don't even need it to run on cash. You can set it up to run on electronic money if you want, or you can take, like just the flexibility of that. You don't have to, put literal flyers on telegraph poles to get anyone to know about it. So the techniques changed. I'm interested in that. I want to sort of wind up by talking about images a little bit. There's the before and after selfies, and there's pictures in the club, but the spaces I like are officially no photo, and taking photos will get you thrown out. And that sometimes happens. So, how do you document that when you're not officially supposed to be photographing it? And it's like, what are the boundaries of the no photo thing? Can I sort of like, tool around the edges of that a little bit? But I have some questions. Like, how do I expose the night? The whole point of nightlife is to not be quite so visible. I don't want to be a tourist in it. As soon as you're taking pictures, you're an outsider to it, yeah? What's the boundaries of how much it ought to be exposed at all? Can I be sort of like among it and alongside it at the same time? Is that possible? Is there a way to photograph the situation itself rather than, like the stereotype rave picture is all the hands in the air with the light behind it, And it's like, yeah, that's not really helpful. And how do you photograph the feeling of it? Like this was sort of some issues that I was thinking about. And, there's a history of nightlife photography. This was sort of 50s Paris, Bohemia. I'll talk about that. This was early 60s trans women, again in Paris. It's a little bit what I call the cis gaze, it's sort of othering trans people. I kind of think Nan Goldin was doing that too, and Nan Goldin to me also sort of repeats the myth of Bohemia as a tragic space where everybody dies young. And it's like, that's already in La Boheme, like this was sort of, this stuff worked because it warmed up a story we already knew. There are some better examples, like if you can find Elegant Spratt's work on Bound by Night, which is about ballroom. And then there's artists who just return the cis gaze, like I love this Juliana Huxtable, and pardon my English, but it's the fuck off stare, you know, and for trans people sometimes to just master that, you just stare people down because they're looking at you like an object, and if you return the gaze, you're making them the object and it makes them uncomfortable and they look away. And it will either get you a beating or avoid it, you know, like it doesn't always work. But I do appreciate this picture, which is like the returning the cis gaze kind of directly, you know. And I recommend these two books as versions of a sort of black, trans, femme, queer aesthetic, both Juliana's Mucus My Pineal Gland, and the other one's called Lote by Scholle von Reinhold. So these worlds are no photo for a reason, and that is someone literally putting their hand over my phone because I'm too close to the dance floor. I was trying to photograph the lights, swear to God, I was like this, but no, like people don't want to, I don't want to be photographed, you know. I'll be covered in sweat and, you know, my eyeliner will run and I don't want anybody to see that. Because of this, there's this very party in a TikTok that when I screen grabbed it already had 68,000 views and a bunch of 18-year-olds asking, how do I find this party called Unter? You know, Unter is not for beginners. Yeah, I love it for people to find their way to their own nightlife world, but Unter is not where you start, you know? There will be substance use on premises, there'll be sex on premises, there'll be some incredibly aggressive cis gay male behavior that will just knock you out of the way because you're not there. So like, don't be starting with that. Start a new local club, you know. So I don't think it's not the velvet rope culture of, you know, it's like, no, it's for anybody, but you have to work your way into it. And you have to know how to handle yourself before you show up. So I got interested in photographing ambiences. And these are all the same lighting designer, by the way, who, when I signed his copy of the book, we went through them all and it's like, oh yeah, and then you did this and that one, you know, because like no one ever gives credit to the lighting designer, but it's such a big part of how this works, yeah. And that second photograph, I'm really glad that's not recognizable because it ended up in the New Yorker. And it's like, I don't want, you know, anything visible from this world to show up with that level of visibility. It was never the objective. This was that party that was in Manhattan. It was 3 stories of built environment. It's a constructed situation. There was a Shibari performance that I missed, but it's in that room. It's weird being in this office space that's now like to do the most useless work possible, right? That's what I love about a rave, is it's like we all work really, really hard to make absolutely nothing except heat. That's it. That's the only product. Because most of our jobs kind of suck and we have to like make awful stuff for other people. So let's do this really intensive labor that makes nothing. It seems like appealing to me, you know. Yeah, 3 stories of light installation, which cost, I'm told, $20,000. You know, it's like, this was like a little like fairyland for ravers, you know. And for once, not all the lighting was like pink and bright green, you know. There was like this going on. It's another shot of the same one. So just concepts that came out of the project. What I call K-time. You don't have to be on ketamine to experience ketamine time or K-time, but it's the sense of a time that's sideways to other kinds of time. When does it feel like there's a pocket in time where there's more time, where you sort of come back to yourself and you realize that it's almost dawn and you've been there since 4 a.m., but it feels like it was 1,000 years. Like sometimes it really just feels like it was 1,000 years. You know? Or sometimes it feels like it was 3 seconds, but really it was 6 hours. You know, so it's that. Like usually it's more time. It's the one I find interesting, and that to me is K-time. And I feel like every time you experience that is connected to every other time you experience it. And I call that rave continuum, that every good piece of it is connected to every other good piece of it as its own separate temporality. That's off to the side. So it's not Walter Benjamin's emergency brake, it's not accelerationism, it's not queer time, sideways time, like try to get a different figure for a different sort of experience of it. And you know, I kind of get into it by dissociating, and dissociation is a pathology, and I have it, and it's not good. It's a trauma response. People with gender dysphoria also dissociate, like way too much. But what if you could also think of it as an ability, as an aesthetic practice when it's not bad? Then what would it be? So what are dissociative aesthetics is sort of like the central question. I feel like I found 3, and I think there's more. Like there's more versions of them. I just got 3 of them, and 4 actually, but I won't do the 4th one. What I call rave space, xenoeuphoria, and lustment were the 3 dissociative aesthetics I got to experience. And rave space is like an out-of-body experience. I can't stop the monologue in my head. You know, there's all these books about how to be a writer. I want a book about how to stop. Like, how do I make it stop? Yeah, I can't. Like the sentences and the paragraphs just form in my head and they will not stop. And the rave doesn't make it stop, but I'm not present in it. It's like they just go by. And it's such a relief. And that's one of the things that I need. And I think it's analogous to things other people need. Yeah. So I don't stop the pressure of that, you know. Thank God it's only one voice too. I have people have more than one, you know, in my life, right? So it's sort of thought without subjectivity in it. And it's a blessing if I can get it, but it's the repetitive movement of the body is part of what produces it. And it's that techno as a musical form tends not to have elaborate narrative structure. It's different to EDM sets, which tend to have, you know, ramp up and false crescendo and big ending, and that's like your festival EDM. And it's like, no. A good techno DJ will take you on like a winding path so that you branch off sideways at some point, you know. And it's the repetition of the movement sort of gets you there, yeah. Xenoeuphoria is different. I got that one from Jessica Dunn-Rovinelli, and I got xenoeuphoria is an expression I got from Charity Heartscape. And it's sort of into embodiment rather than out of it. It's like a reassociation, but it's where you are actually at peace with the feeling of how alien your own body is. And that's certainly like a good way to have gender dysphoria, is like, oh yeah, this is all just wrong, but it's like I'm an alien and I'm okay with it. It's sort of that experience. And then there's ways in which that feels distributed into other bodies. You can kind of just relate that strangeness to the strangeness of others. And I find that one helps connect me. You know what Fred Moten says about consent not to be a single being, and the attempt to not be a single being, I think, is an important part of rave practice with people who are good at it, you know, people who are not necessarily good dancers, but used to being on dance floors and used to feeling the kinesthetic sense and how it relates to those around you. And then enlustment, a little bit self-explanatory, right? But it's kind of into the body. You feel like you're hot, and also literally hot, probably sweating as well. But the banality of it is what's interesting to me. It's sort of like a mammalian sense of, you know, you just like grind off levels of not just of subjectivity, but humanness, and get down to the mammalian sense through sheer repetition and presence with others doing the same. I just took down my dose of progesterone because I was getting like super smell, like my sense of smell was getting really heightened, which happens to pregnant people because it's massive amounts usually of progesterone. And it's like, oh boy, this is what we really smell like. Like usually it's tamped down and like on the dance floor, it was like, oh my God, we're freaking mammals. That's all that's going on here, you know. So I had to take the pee back down a little bit. So that was getting a little too much at times. But as part of that sense of, the other dissociated state, like weirdly reassociates me to that, to something that's not even human anymore. Human all too human. And to be, and sort of comfort and even delight in that. So that's it. So that's just to wind up. I just got it under the arm. To wind up with, how is the dissociative possibly also an aesthetic domain? And you could probably, nothing's ever original, right? Like, oh, where has that cropped up before? Like, who's previously written about that? Or what art previously did that is a question that I'm not going to pursue, but one could, I think. Yeah. And that's where it ends. That's the photo got taken after the party ended, and that's the promoters and the DJ, and I'm second from the right. Like gets out at 9 o'clock in the morning in a room full of fog and sweat. And This is one of the best things in my life. I love it, but it's not for everyone, I'm aware. But the sort of meta question is, if you don't want to do anything like this, is there elements of method that are applicable to other kinds of aesthetic practices that one might want to engage in? And that's all she wrote. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh God, I gotta take the Twitter off. It's like, I'm not barely there. I'm on Blue Sky though.
All right, so I think we have a little bit of time for questions if people would like to have a conversation, and also for folks here on Zoom, if you want to just drop your questions in the chat, I will be happy to relate them. Yeah, I'll just open it up, see if anybody has anything to start us off with.
Well, okay, so the last thing that you mentioned was kind of my question, because I have tried raving and I don't know if it's necessarily for me, because I am the sober kind. But have you been able to find anything else in your life that it comes even close to comparing to raving in terms of being able to find, I don't know, these dissociative aesthetics in a good way?
I mean, sober raving is a thing, and it's a whole other network in the space, which I discovered because I dated somebody who was sober in the scene for a minute. I'm like, oh wait, you know completely different people. And so that put me in touch with, and it's harder. I've done it, and it's like, it takes longer and it's harder, but it's doable. And so, respect, that's a way that you can experience that. It's the thing that worked for me. I kind of need some dimension of, extreme alterity to be able to come back to functioning. But not everybody does. This book is in a series called Practices, and one of the other ones is called Fly Fishing, which I actually tried for 3 summers when I was still cosplaying masculinity. I did fly fishing, with the fellas. And it's like, it was so the opposite, but so intense. The aesthetic of the what do you call it, the lure, the fly itself, and which ones would work in which, incredibly, it's an art, it's not, and someone's like, yeah, and all they'll have these weird names, try a woolly bugger over on that reef over there, maybe that'll work with this light and that temperature. And yeah, so that one I never caught a single fish ever. It's catch and release, so no killing of fish is involved. But yeah, I could sort of see even that is the intensity of it and investment in it. And I now have no respect for other kinds of fishing because it seems like cheating. You put a bait on the hook, so of course the fish ate it. That's just cheating, There's no bait in fly fishing. You're making television for fish and trying to persuade a fish that the show that you made, that is just pure television, is actually edible. Yeah, it's amazing to me. It's imagine making an art that's for a different species altogether. It already exists, and it's fly fishing. So yeah, I think, but how do you go about it? So how do you get into that world? I would always be an outsider to the upstate, fly fishing world, but you have conversations. And I had a guide once who just saw me struggling with something and just took the rod out of my hand and went like that and landed the fly on a piece of water about that big, where he had seen something bob, and the fish bit. It didn't hook, but it bit, And I later learned this is somebody who does struggle with substance abuse, lives in his car, but has won the local casting competition 10 years in a row. So this person has the rarest skill you could possibly imagine. So what is that? And how is that alive? Would be if that was the line I was pursuing, the method in that case. Yeah, but I don't know. Some people prefer to stay home and play board games, and could be equally valid as a thing to think through as a practice.
I have a question. So earlier you were talking about how you read a lot of theory, but as you transitioned, it was harder for you to write it. I was just curious, like, is it because of the desire to feel more embodied, and perhaps theory is too embodied for you, and that's how auto theory emerged? And I also have another question that kind of relates. You were talking about like sort of the precariousness of the rave, but also how necessary it is for queer and trans survival, and maybe it is the transience of all these things that we like hold dear and cling on to it so much. But I wonder if these pockets allow you to dissociate in a way that reassociates you, where auto theory and embodiment emerge in a different way, and also into your writing.
I got the idea that it's reassociative from a girl called Benjamin something who I met in Berlin. So I just want to, if this is recorded, put I wish I could remember her name, because I didn't get that idea myself. But yeah, so what if you don't have any choice but to dissociate, can you then also make it a practice that reassociates, but not where you were, with something else? And maybe that's one of the parameters of need. The book starts with this thing about, the first thing I look for at the rave is who needs it, rather than who's a tourist in it. And it's okay for people to have different uses of nightlife, that's fine, but the people I want to be with need it, and need each other in it, in a way too, And it's not exclusively queer and trans. There's people who, as far as I can tell, are functionally heterosexual in the rest of their lives, but they're queer on the dance floor because they understand those are the conventions of it, and they let themselves be in that space in a way. So I think there's a sexuality specific to how you dance in a way, or eroticism, right? Be a better word for it. Yeah, there's that. What was the other? Oh, yeah, the reason I prefer the word transsexual to the word transgender is I changed my sex, motherfuckers, and it was hard work and irreversible, thank God. And it's at the level of the body, it's not decoration. And, I spent my life becoming a writer. And, the analogy I've got for it is, let's just say I had learned the clarinet rather than writing, and I got pretty good at it. And then I went on hormones and I transitioned, and suddenly it's a saxophone. I can still play it, right? The fingering is similar, and it's a wind instrument, but I just cannot get the finer music out of it. It just would not come, So I had to learn a different instrument in a way. I'm a sax player now, awesome. It's got different tones and different possibilities, And yeah, I did get, it sounds like a cliche, but I did get more interested in the emotional resonance in the text than I was before. So I feel like Reverse Cowgirl, I was sort of learning some of that, and it just wouldn't come. And then Raving was a commission. I was just asked if I could do it at short notice. The commissioning editor had commissioned 4 books and one dropped out. And she wanted to start with 4, and she was like, can you do a book in 6 weeks, And the other thing I'm prone to is mania, and I'm like, I can do a book in 6 weeks, I'm like, the thing I thought I had learned from a lifetime of mania is never to involve other people and never to sign contracts. And I did both those things. I'm like, oh crap. But actually it came, I had a bit of persuading that it would be Raving. But once I showed her an excerpt, it was like, yeah, that's it, so that was how the writing sort of changed. And other trans writers might have different answers to that. That was just my particular experience of it. That it was disruptive, but, in a good way.
One of the questions is
If you could project a little bit.
okay, so you mentioned a little bit on how the modern life and the relation with the ways of you mentioned the stereotypes and how we dealing with it. It was already woven into the way of more engaging an experience or some kind of knowledge inherently. So I wonder if that part is a bit if there's like more things on it as a way of like alienation, and how could we like reverse it through raving or like practicing to kind of like get rid of it, or kind of like thinking reversely on that.
Yeah, and the sort of discourse on this goes back to George Simmel, and I think it's called Anatomy and Social Life, the essay, which was about, the experience of people who were part of the Great Migration into cities and discovering that most people around you are strangers, so how do you interact with that? And there are whole cultural and literary forms that attempted to do it. Walter Benjamin writes about the physiognomies, which were guides to how to read people through how they presented themselves. And then there's a lot of comedy about deceptive appearances. He appears to be a gentleman, but he has tailor's scissors in his pocket. So, he's finely dressed, but it's just because he got it for cheap, So the idea of deceptive appearance becomes a whole thing in thinking about presentation and social types and urban experience. So there's that, that sort of dimension of it. And then where is sort of a relative kind of anonymity, like freedom from having a particular public bearing, sort of welcome. And, rave's got that in stages. So, the no photo thing means, it's not in that, reproduction of, documentation and surveillance. So it's not that. It's not a world where people dress up a whole lot, but people might, in a fairly minimal way, express themselves differently. There's a lot of gender play, like people aren't trans in the rest of their life, but their gender presentations are different at the party, is a whole thing. So you sort of, it's a space outside of social space to kind of, experience yourself differently. And then, for those of us who are trans, it's like, you coming over this side, is this heading somewhere? That's a kind of whole thing. There's dark rooms at some of these parties, so rooms that are literally dark for usually gay male sexual practices, where it's you take the visible out of it altogether and experience the body through the other senses. Shifting sense ratios is a thing that's worth mentioning there as well. You'd think the rave's about heightening your sense of hearing, but it's not. Everyone's got earplugs in, you feel it. It's kinesthetic, it's the sub-bass vibrating through your flesh. And there's usually fog, so you don't see a whole lot. So it's kinesthetic is the sense that's highlighted. Your movement through space and how everybody else is moving. So how do you sort of get us out of both being framed in everyday life as a certain type, but also, outside of being structured as, by the name that's on your driver's license kind of thing. Because I don't answer the name on my driver's license, I always think of that bit in Foucault where he writes about, do not ask us our names, leave it to the police to see that our documents are in order. We are going to that place where no one knows us to pursue the dark avenues and blah, blah, blah. He's talking about cruising, right? You got this whole paragraph about cruising into the end of archaeology of knowledge, I love it. So it sort of performs the thing it says it's doing in a way. I've horribly misquoted it, by the way, but you get the general idea of where I went with that.
Any other questions here? If you don't mind, I might just jump in for a second while people are thinking. So there's as always a lot here to think through. I know, and perhaps it was intentional that you left out the like bit about the world historical dimension of stuff from the end of the book. But just since I think it kind of like directly ties into some of the stuff we've been doing in the course. I'm curious. I think you're resisting the temptation here to like directly politicize the practice, right? There's a moment here where you're like, this isn't this isn't Stonewall, like but with maybe the exception of the idea of sort of like the practice of endurance and like doing all this work explicitly to like not produce something. But I am curious like how that temporality connects up or doesn't connect up to the kind of like actual historical time that we're in, or the moment where it seems like maybe there is no future. Is this just sort of that? Like, does this then become just sort of like a necessary escape from that sort of like the grimness of that reality, or is there still some kind of like prefigurative dimension to it? I'm just kind of like, I understand the desire to resist that, right? And it also sort of feels like that used to be sort of like one of the ideas or the aspirations around it was like just being in community with people in like a different modality. I don't know. Just I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about it.
I don't know, maybe 400 people in a warehouse in Brooklyn for 12 hours is as much like anarchy/communism as Americans are capable of. It's like you get that much done.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's not nothing. I'm always reluctant to say that its value is that because it produces something else, and why is the political the time that's most highly valued, particularly by intellectuals, strikes me as entirely questionable.
Yeah.
Why is that more important than the cultural time, for example, or cultural power? Like what just happened in the United States is as much about cultural power as anything else. We kind of see how much that does. So yeah, like maybe that's not nothing to be able to do that. I was just thinking during Black Lives Matter, I'm a physical coward, so I didn't really want to be confronting police, but all right, get out on the street, but I want to be with people I know from the rave world, because I know how they handle their bodies. Like I know what their bodies are like in a mass with each other, and I know if there's a move to go somewhere, we'll all pick it up and move together without hesitation. So yeah, it's just like a thing I went to this party. I shouldn't have named who it was for. I was like supposed to give a talk, and there would be like the closing party after, And I sort of get there, and everybody is looking around waiting for somebody else to make it start. I'm like, I'm not going to be that person. Like I want to go where everybody gets in and starts it without question. Wait for someone else to do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, you all aren't in your bodies. Like for all our faults, the people I want to be around are. Like we got that. We figured that piece out. We might not like our bodies or be happy with them, and it might be a struggle, but like there's a practice we have that brings that to us, and I think that's nothing, But yeah, how do you operate when there might not be many possible futures without holding on a little bit too much to the fantasy of them, but also without being so demobilized that you then, sort of give up. So hence the figure of sideways time. Well, actually, like what if you think about the possibility of building it out sideways, is there maybe not nothing in relation to that. Rather than always think in sort of apocalyptic terms, as is one's want at the moment. But, it's harder to get out of being modern than any of us imagined. Turns out.
final thoughts, last chance. You have another one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one more.
I don't know, it's kind of simple. I'm just curious, like, if you have a favorite dissociative aesthetic, and also like, if when you go raving, if they all kind of happen throughout the night, or if it like fluctuates, or like one like specifically leads into another, or they have like a relationship with each other in like a specific way, for you at least. That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, you know, and sometimes none of them happen at all.
Yeah.
You know, and then I have to just like be satisfied with it. I saw my friends and it was really good exercise. You know, like I'm 63, so like getting 10,000 steps in a day is important, and I don't quite. So then it's 30,000 at the party gives me a week's average, and I'm like, that's not nothing. So sometimes nothing. And I was raised atheist, but we're lapsed Protestants, so you cannot make grace happen. You know, it comes when it chooses, you have nothing to do with it. You know, there's no good works will make it happen. That's why I sort of think a little bit like that. So yeah, sometimes only one, sometimes a bit of all of them. Enlistment's my favorite, like no surprise, but the other ones are good too. And you sort of only know they happen when they end. Like any flow state. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's book Flow is sort of maybe adjacent to that. Anyone who's ever come across that one? So they're sort of flow states, maybe. And it's sort of like it just ended, and then you realize, oh, that's where that was. Or in the middle of it, you can flickeringly perceive it as what it is, and then you're back in it, hopefully. But sometimes perceiving it will kick you out of it, so you're not trying to attend to that too much, just like let it be. And for me, just being personally, incredibly difficult to sort of stay in that, find it and sustain it if it happens, you know. But it's, you know, it's like I explained the can't stop the writing thing, you know, it's like it's the only thing that gives me relief from that, you know. Not comparing myself here at all, but I said something critical about Slavoj Žižek once, and someone who knows him well was like, yeah, but imagine being him, it doesn't stop. The only thing that gives him relief is Wagner, you know? And I'm like, oh my God, that would be so much worse than what I deal with, you know? Like, it gave me compassion for a writer with whom I have disagreements, you know? Like, wow, it doesn't stop, you know, it's like continually ticking over. I'm like, oh girl, come on Slavoj, we'll take you to the party. Get some earplugs, get you hydrated, and you know, like, after the first 10,000 steps, you know, it's just, it's physical too, how to get you back connected to that physicality.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to end, and we'll let you stop with the discourse for a minute. So thank you very much again for joining us. It was really lovely to have you here.